I was about 9 years old when this happened, and I still can't fully make sense of it. We lived in a rented house at the end of a quiet street, but the neighborhood was a bit sketchy. My mom was a nurse, and since she worked night shifts, I'd often stay home with my older brother, Lucas. He was 14 at the time and was in charge of watching me until my mom got back in the morning. Our house was small but cozy, a living room, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. That night, like usual, my mom left for work around 7 p.m., leaving us a note saying she'd be home early in the morning. After dinner, Lucas was playing video games in the living room, and I went in my room to play with my action figures. Whenever my mom worked nights, he'd stay up late gaming while I went to bed earlier. Around 11 p.m., I was lying in bed when I started hearing a weird noise coming from my bedroom window. It sounded like someone scratching the glass. At first, I thought it might have been the wind or a tree branch, but the noise kept going. Feeling uneasy, I called Lucas, who came in annoyed and quickly checked. He said nothing was there, and that I was just imagining things before heading back to his game. I tried to brush it off and sleep, but the scratching got louder, and then I heard footsteps in the hallway. I froze in bed, trying to listen closely. The footsteps were slow, almost like someone was trying to be quiet. My first thought was that it was Lucas, but I could still hear the sounds of his video game in the living room. I called out to him, but no one answered. My breathing got heavier, and a chill ran down my spine. Gathering some courage, I got out of bed and opened my door just a crack. The hallway was dark, but I could see a tall figure standing near the kitchen door. They were facing me, and the back door leading to the yard was wide open. I swallowed hard and bolted to the living room, where Lucas was still gaming like nothing was wrong. I frantically told him about someone being in the house, but he just laughed and called me a scared little kid. Before I could argue, we both heard loud, heavy footsteps coming from the kitchen. Lucas froze. He paused his game and stared at me, realizing I wasn't joking. Without a word, we both ran to his bedroom and locked the door. Outside, we could hear whoever it was rummaging around the kitchen, opening drawers and moving pans like they were looking for something. We sat on the floor, hearts pounding, waiting for any sign that the police were on their way. The house was eerily quiet now, which somehow felt even scarier. Lucas held his phone tightly, staring at the door like he expected it to burst open at any second. After a few minutes, we heard a siren in the distance, which gave us a little relief. But before we could even relax, there was a loud crash from the kitchen, like something heavy had been knocked over. Lucas whispered for me to stay put and went to the window to try to see what was going on. When he came back, his face was pale. "There's someone in the backyard," he whispered, barely audible. Before I could say anything, we heard loud banging on the living room window. It wasn't just knocking. It sounded like someone punching the glass with pure rage. We froze, unsure of what to do, until the lights from the police car lit up the front of the house. The banging stopped immediately. Everything went quiet again. When the officers came inside, the front door was wide open, but there was no sign of anyone in the house or the yard. The police searched the entire house but came up empty. They asked if we were absolutely sure someone had been there. Lucas tried to explain about the noises, the open door, and the figure in the hallway, but they didn't seem convinced. One of the officers suggested it might have been an animal or even the wind, but I knew that wasn't possible. There was no way I imagined something so real. They told us they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night and suggested we lock all the doors and windows. After the police left, we stayed in Lucas's room until sunrise, too scared to even peek outside. When my mom came home, we told her everything. She was shaken but didn't know what to think either. A few weeks later, we moved out of that house, mostly because she insisted. Even now, I still get chills thinking about the sound of that laughter outside the door. What bothers me the most is that I'll probably never know who that person was or what they wanted. I was 20 at the time, in my final year of college, and spent most of the summer home alone. My parents had gone out of town to visit some relatives, so I had the house to myself. That was never a big deal before. I'd usually just relax, watch movies, or play video games. That night, I was on the couch watching a show on my laptop, with most of the lights in the house turned off. It was close to midnight when I heard a loud knock at the front door. It wasn't casual. It was quick and insistent, the kind of knock that makes your heart race. I got up slowly and walked to the door, but before doing anything, I checked through the peephole. There was a man standing on the porch, wearing a dark jacket. He looked uneasy, glancing around and fiddling with his phone. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, unsure if I should ask what he wanted. Then he spoke, almost in a whisper. "Hey, I'm looking for Marcos. Is he here?" My stomach dropped. I didn't know anyone named Marcos. I stayed silent, watching as he waited a few seconds. He stepped back like he was going to leave, but then I heard footsteps on the sidewalk. Another man showed up and joined him. They started whispering to each other, and I got the worst feeling about it. After a while, they walked away from the porch, but I wasn't quick enough to see where they went. Everything got quiet, and I thought maybe they had given up. Still, I muted my laptop and turned off the living room light so I could stay hidden in the dark. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps along the side of the house. My heart started pounding. I ran to the side window and saw one of them walking close to the wall, with the other one right behind him, trying to peek through the windows. I held my breath and crouched down, hoping they wouldn't see me. One of them whispered something to the other, and they moved toward the backyard gate. At that point, I knew something bad was about to happen. I grabbed my phone and called the police, keeping my voice as quiet as possible while explaining what was going on. As I was talking, I heard the sound of the backyard gate being unlocked. They were inside now. As soon as I hung up the phone, I heard their footsteps in the backyard. I moved to the kitchen, where I had a partial view of the back door. I could see one of their shadows moving near the door, and then I heard the sound of someone trying the doorknob. My whole body froze when I heard one of them say, "It's locked, but there's probably another way in." The doorknob stopped rattling, but then I heard the sound of tools. They were trying to break in. Without thinking twice, I ran to the guest room on the opposite side of the house and locked myself in. I grabbed a chair to block the door, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. While I waited, I could hear the sound of wood creaking as they worked on the back door. It didn't take long before I heard the sound of it giving way. The next thing I knew, the house went silent except for their slow, deliberate footsteps moving inside. Their footsteps echoed as they walked through the house, opening drawers and doors as they went. It was clear they were searching for something, but I had no idea what. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they might hear it. Every minute felt like an hour, and I kept wondering if the police were going to show up in time. Then, I heard their footsteps getting closer to the hallway where I was hiding. The doorknob to the guest room started to turn, but the door was locked. One of them muttered something I couldn't make out, and I heard them walking away. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then, from somewhere else in the house, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I didn't know if they had broken a window or something else, but the noise made me jump. My fear only got worse when I heard one of them say out loud, "I think he's in here." My heart nearly stopped. They knew I was there. I could hear their footsteps getting heavier and quicker, heading back toward the hallway. One of them started banging on the door, trying to force it open. The chair I'd propped up was creaking under the pressure, and I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Just when I thought they were about to break through, I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The banging stopped suddenly, and everything went quiet. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing. Then I heard quick footsteps moving toward the back of the house, and the sound of a door slamming shut. It seemed like they were running to get away. I stayed locked in the room, too terrified to move until I heard knocking on the front door and voices yelling, "Police?" Even then, I hesitated. It wasn't until they came to the guest room and called out to me that I finally opened the door. 2 officers were standing there, and they said they'd already checked the house but hadn't found anyone. They confirmed the back door had been forced open, but the intruders were gone. Strangely, despite the mess they'd left in some rooms, Nothing appeared to have been stolen. I showed them the broken glass, and they assured me they'd keep looking for the men. But to this day, I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. All I know is that night changed the way I feel about being home alone. Even now, I double-check every lock and listen to every little sound. I'll probably never know why they were there or what they were looking for, but the thought of it still sends chills down my spine. Earlier this year, there was a massive power outage in my city after a brutal winter storm. I live in a small house in the suburbs, and the wind was howling so loud it made the windows shake. The roads were covered in ice, so leaving wasn't an option, and the power went out around 4 p.m. Without internet or heat, I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to kill time on my phone until the battery died. Even though I was home alone, I felt relatively safe. After all, who'd be wandering around in weather like that? Around 7 p.m., I heard a noise coming from the back door. It was faint but consistent, like something was scraping against the floor. My heart started racing, but I tried convincing myself it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch. I grabbed an old flashlight I found in a cabinet and went to check it out. Shining the light on the door, I didn't see anything outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I quickly shut the curtains and told myself I was just overthinking things because of the darkness and the eerie silence outside. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to that sound. About 20 minutes later, I heard another noise, this time at the living room window. It was a dull thud, like something small had hit the glass. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the flashlight again and peeked outside, but there was nothing. Just the darkness and snow piling up on the windowsill. Still, I pulled the curtains shut and decided to head upstairs. For some reason, the bedroom felt a little safer. I climbed into bed and wrapped myself in the blankets, trying to ignore how quiet everything was. I was starting to drift off when I heard it, faint footsteps outside. My eyes flew open, and I jumped out of bed, heading for the window. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the backyard. For just a second, I saw someone standing near the fence. They were wearing a thick coat, but no hood, and their face was too hard to make out in the snow and shadows. I turned the flashlight off instantly, my heart pounding in my chest. Who the hell would be out there in the middle of the night during a storm like this? After turning off the flashlight, I stayed frozen, peeking through the gap in the curtains, but I couldn't see them anymore. Maybe they had left, I thought, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Just to be safe, I locked my bedroom door and sat on the floor, trying to listen for any sounds downstairs. The house was dead silent, but somehow, the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. I kept telling myself it could have been a neighbor or maybe even a lost delivery driver, but deep down, none of that made sense. About 10 minutes later, the silence was broken by something unmistakable. The sound of the back door handle turning. It wasn't frantic or loud, but slow and deliberate, like someone testing it. My stomach dropped. I knew for sure I had locked that door earlier, but the sound was clear as day. I grabbed my phone to call the police, only to realize the battery had died hours ago. I had no way to get help. All I could do was sit there, frozen, praying they'd give up and leave. The handle eventually stopped moving, and things went quiet again. I started to think maybe they had left, but then I heard something else, a sharp cracking sound, followed by a metallic clink. My blood ran cold. It came from the kitchen. I didn't need to look to know what had happened. They broke the window. I grabbed a blanket and hid in my bedroom closet, holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. Seconds later, I heard footsteps on the hardwood floor downstairs. Someone was inside my house. My mind raced for options, but I couldn't think of anything except staying hidden. The footsteps slowed, like they were methodically checking every room. I could hear drawers being opened, furniture being dragged. My only hope was that they'd grab something and leave without coming upstairs. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. Were they gone? Or were they listening? I waited, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. I didn't dare move a muscle. Just when I thought the worst might be over, I heard footsteps on the stairs. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Whoever it was, they were coming up. Each step was slow, deliberate, like they knew exactly where I was. I shrank further into the closet, barely able to breathe. Then the footsteps stopped, right outside my bedroom door. I heard the doorknob turn, but it didn't budge. It was locked. For a moment, there was silence again. Then came the sound that haunts me to this day. 3 slow, steady knocks on the door. They weren't aggressive or hurried, just deliberate, like they knew I was there. My entire body was trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to move. After what felt like forever, the knocking stopped, and I heard the footsteps retreating down the stairs. I stayed hidden until morning. When I finally worked up the courage to check, the house was empty, but the back door was wide open, and wet footprints trailed through the kitchen. To this day, I don't know who it was or what they wanted, but I haven't slept the same since. I was 21 at the time, living alone in a small apartment, and had just started my internship at a tech company. I've always been a skeptic, the kind of person who doesn't scare easily and thinks they can handle anything. But that night, something happened that I still can't forget. It was a Saturday night, and my next-door neighbor, Amanda, texted me asking for help because she'd heard strange noises in the hallway. She knew I was home because we talked through the intercom earlier, so I decided to head over and see what was going on. When I got to her apartment, she looked visibly shaken. She said she was sure she'd heard footsteps right outside her door, but when she checked through the peephole, no one was there. I figured she was just being paranoid, but to help her feel better, I agreed to stick around for a bit. We chatted about random stuff while I tried to convince her it was probably nothing. But about 20 minutes later, while she went to the kitchen to grab something to drink, I heard a faint noise coming from the front door. It was the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. I stood up immediately, trying to process what I had just heard. Amanda rushed back from the kitchen, pale, and whispered that no one else had a key to her apartment. The sound stopped for a moment, but then the doorknob started to jiggle, like someone was trying to force it open. I gestured for Amanda to call the police while I pounded on the door, hoping to scare off whoever was outside. I yelled, asking who it was, but got no answer. Amanda was shaking as she handed me the phone, saying the cops were on their way. A few minutes later, we heard hurried footsteps running down the hallway. I peeked through the peephole but couldn't see anything except the dim lights of the building. When the police arrived, I explained what happened, and they checked the hallway and the entire building. They didn't find anyone. I thought it was over, but when we went back into Amanda's apartment, we found something that froze me in my tracks. Deep scratches on the inside of the door, like someone had been trying to pry it open with a tool. The cops took pictures of the scratches and asked Amanda if she had given a copy of her key to anyone or suspected someone who might have access to the building. She said no, insisting she'd been living there alone for years without any problems. One of the officers suggested it could have been a failed break-in, but something about the situation felt off. Why would someone try such a loud, risky method in a residential building? Amanda also mentioned hearing the footsteps way before the attempt at the door, as if whoever it was had been lurking around. After the cops left, Amanda was too scared to stay alone, so I decided to hang out a bit longer. We were talking, trying to distract ourselves, but I could see her constantly glancing toward the hallway, like she was expecting something to happen again. To help calm her nerves, I suggested we double-check all the locks and windows. That's when we found something even creepier. On the windowsill in the living room, there were fresh finger marks, like someone had been holding onto it. The thing that sent chills down my spine? Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, with no way to climb up from outside. Amanda froze when she saw the marks. I tried to brush it off, saying it could have been old smudges, but but even I didn't believe that. The prints were fresh, like they had been made that night. I inspected the window closer, but it didn't look like anyone had tried to force it open. Still, the fact that there were marks there, at that height, was unnerving. Amanda was visibly shaken, and I could feel her panic growing. We called the cops again to report what we'd found. When they came back, they inspected the window and the prints, but said there was no evidence that someone had climbed up. They assured us they would do a more thorough patrol of the area and left again. I decided to stay with Amanda for the night since she was terrified. The hours dragged on, every sound or shadow making us jump. By the time the sun came up, we were still on edge, completely exhausted. As morning came, I started to believe we'd gotten through the worst of it. But then, as I looked at the piece of paper we'd found earlier, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave me. I hadn't told Amanda what it said, and she hadn't asked again, probably too scared to know. I kept staring at the messy handwriting. The words burned into my mind. I know you're there. It wasn't just a prank. It felt calculated, like someone had been watching us. I stayed with Amanda a little longer that morning, helping her check the locks and windows one last time before I left. She thanked me, but I could tell she was still scared out of her mind. I told her to call me if anything else happened and made her promise to consider getting her locks changed immediately. I left her place, but the unease stayed with me. Over the next few days, I kept checking in on Amanda, and luckily, nothing else strange happened. But even now, I can't shake the memory of that night. The footsteps, the scratches on the door, and those words on the note. The police never found any evidence or leads about who it could have been, and the whole thing just faded away like it never happened. But every time I think about it, I can't help but wonder, was that person watching us the whole time, waiting for the right moment? To this day, Amanda and I don't talk much about that night. It's one of those things that's better left buried. But sometimes, late at night, when I hear a creak in my own apartment or catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I can't help but think, what if whoever it was isn't done yet?